You tell me, is the idea of an electric sports car really all that crazy? EVs have been mainstream for the better part of a decade now, but we have yet to see a full-fledged mass-market EV sports car. And that is despite a lot of big promises from a bunch of different automakers. Sure, there's the original Tesla Roadster, but that's really more of a novelty than anything else. There's also the Rimac Nevera, but with a price tag of $2.5 million, I would hardly call that mass market. But even considering that there has been a recent downtick in EV demand growth, it still seems like we might be on the precipice of a breakthrough. So with that in mind, we are going to talk through why it's taken so long to get an EV sports car, what is inherent to an EV's design that has precluded it from this segment, and talk about how the future may shape up for EV sports cars. So right now, there have to be at least a few people screaming at their phone screens about their disdain for EVs and how they are bound to fail. Electric vehicles aren't going away anytime soon, and whether it is in 10 years, 15, 20 years, with economies of scale, EVs are eventually going to become the default option. And even as of right now, EVs cover just about every single part of the market, from crossovers to sedans to off-road SUVs to pickup trucks, but the one segment that doesn't have an EV, sports cars. Now, an important distinction I want to draw here is that we definitely do have EV performance cars. And to be honest, because of the inherent benefits of an electric powertrain, most EVs are pretty fast. But just being fast does not make something a sports car. It can make something a performance car maybe, but not a sports car. For example, all of the Plaid Edition Teslas are insanely fast. Hyundai has the Ioniq 5N. Porsche has the Taycan Turbo GT that can get around a racetrack incredibly quickly, but none of these are sports cars. A sports car is a vehicle that combines performance with engagement, and it makes some kind of sacrifice to achieve that. That means that it has a compact size to save weight. Generally, it's only going to have 2 doors. It's going to have stiff suspension to enhance grip and handling. It's going to have really communicative steering so you can tell what the front tires are doing. And of course, there's also the audible noise from the engine and the transmission working harmoniously together to propel the car down the road. And through all of these things, there is this emotional appeal of engagement where you feel really involved in using this machine instead of just giving it orders and telling it where to go. There has yet to be an EV that offers this type of experience, and there's likely a few different reasons as to why. The first is really the target demographic for EVs. When these vehicles started first rolling out, when this technology was first introduced to us, it was really pitched as a way to save the planet by not burning fossil fuels. In addition to that, a lot of early iterations of electric powertrains were just pretty bad, so the cars had to be as efficient as possible to maximize range. And none of the things I just mentioned align themselves particularly well with sports cars. There's also the fact that most automakers that build sports cars don't build them to really make all that much money. For example, the Ford Mustang is one of the best-selling sports cars in the entire car market, but it only constitutes around 2.5% of Ford's annual sales. So subsequently, when Ford is making these really difficult planning decisions on how to focus their finite resources, sports cars aren't going to be at the top of the list. Most of the time, building sports cars is just like a branding exercise for the automaker to get people into their dealerships and ultimately sell them a crossover SUV. In addition to that, as automakers have started to expand their EV lineups, they've decided to offer vehicles in segments that actually have mass market appeal. And I think we can look to Tesla as a pretty good example of this. Technically, their first vehicle was a sports car in the form of the Roadster that got people excited about the brand, but their first true mass market product was a luxury sedan in the form of the Model S. Subsequently, as Tesla has expanded their lineup, they've added crossovers, they've added a smaller, more compact sedan, they've even added a pickup truck, but they still don't have a sports car. And when we look at just the logistics of an electric powertrain, there are some inherent traits that we just typically don't associate with performance cars or sports cars, and chief among them is just weight. The biggest culprit in making EVs heavy is the battery. Consumers have come to expect that an EV is going to have a minimum range of around 200 miles, and to achieve that, you're usually talking about a battery that in and of itself weighs between 1,000 and 2,000 pounds. And that is really just the battery. You then have to factor in all of the other drivetrain components, the wiring, the computers, the electric motors, and all of this starts to add up very quickly. For a quick comparison, the legendary Lamborghini V12, which is known for being a massive hulking engine, has a dry weight of around 500 pounds. That is around half the weight of your typical EV battery. And it is very well established that weight is just the enemy of sports cars. It makes everything more difficult, whether that be accelerating, decelerating, getting the car around a turn. Weight is just not something that you want. Now, I think a lot of those things are very well known. One other aspect that I think is kind of often overlooked is that if you are already going to build a car that is going to be inherently heavy, you might as well give it 4 doors and a bunch of cargo space. If you're comparing a sedan and a crossover with a traditional gas powertrain, most of the weight delta between those two different cars is going to come from the fact that the crossover is just a bigger vehicle. But when you're looking at two vehicles with an electric powertrain, that delta on a percentage basis between those two vehicles is going to be a lot less because most of the weight is constituted in the battery and not necessarily in the fact that one car is physically larger than the other. And building on that, if you're going to try and go and build an EV sports car, having a compact size isn't necessarily going to save you all that much weight because again, all of that weight is coming from the battery. Short of a massive breakthrough in battery technology or people being just a lot more comfortable with their car having less range, this is always going to be something we have to contend with. Another aspect of electric vehicles that doesn't particularly lend itself well to sports cars is sound and feel. And obviously for automotive enthusiasts, the sound of an internal combustion engine is likely one of the best sounds in the entire world. The sound of an internal combustion engine is so crucial and so fundamental to the experience of a sports car. This is a big issue. Some automakers, like the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, have started to experiment with artificial engine noise and artificial gear shifts, even at the sake of performance. And while purists may absolutely despise this idea, I do think it is a trend that will continue into the future. One other alternative that I would propose is that electric motors themselves are not totally silent. There are other sounds that occur in an electric vehicle that could just be passed through or maybe amplified that could give more of a connected feeling, although I don't know if it will ever be a true substitute for the sound of an internal combustion engine. So for one of our last points, we will touch on the fact that under heavy performance driving, an EV battery drains extremely quickly. So that advertised 250 miles of range might shrink down to maybe 20 or 30 miles when you're driving the car all out at a racetrack, and that is another big issue. Not only is that a bigger reduction in efficiency versus what an internal combustion car would expect, but with an EV, the process then to recharge is also more cumbersome. And maybe you could make the argument that most people aren't going to be taking their theoretical EV sports car to the racetrack, but I still think the same premise holds true for spirited on-road driving as well. Now, despite all of these potential hurdles, there are some very legitimate advantages to electric powertrains, particularly straight line acceleration and the price point that performance is able to be offered at. Currently, the quickest car in the world is an EV in the form of the Rimac Nevera. Now, admittedly, that costs $2.5 million, but to get something that's only a few tenths slower in the quarter mile, you could look at the Lucid Air Sapphire, which costs like a tenth of the price. And this trend is also apparent at the very low end of the car market as well, where the Tesla Model 3 Performance is quicker than just about any other comparably priced car. In the best case scenario for the EV sports car, it is able to bundle this accessible performance with a package that adds engagement and personality to the car. And that is my hope with this upcoming first generation of EV sports cars. And if there is one brand that I would trust to pull this off well, it would be Porsche, and they are currently working on an EV version of the Boxster and the Cayman. Porsche has a long history in motorsport and has forever been a darling of car enthusiasts. As of right now, the details on this car are still pretty sparse. We don't know what the official weight figure will be, whether it will be comparable to the normal internal combustion engine version, or if Porsche has figured out an effective way to add soul and personality to this car. But again, if there's one brand I would trust to pull this off, it would be Porsche. Which kind of leads to the bigger question at hand, which is, as these automakers start to introduce these EV sports cars, will they be well received by car buyers? And this is something we just don't really have a clear answer on. If the future is as electrified as some people will have you believe, they kind of will have to be successful because they will be the only option. But if they continue to be sold alongside comparably priced gas cars, or even being more expensive than gas-powered versions, I have a very hard time believing that they are going to catch on. While EV sports cars might be able to offer really incredible levels of straight-line performance, there's also been really impressive advancements made with internal combustion engines that has also made that power a lot more accessible as well. And just straight-line speed is no longer going to be the big selling factor that it might be now or has been in the past. And that engagement factor, the sound of the engine, the feel of the transmission, could be bigger selling points into the future. Alternatively, if these EV sports cars come out and they are priced significantly lower, and internal combustion engine sports cars start to get stuffed out by regulations, and a new generation of car enthusiasts come up that are more receptive to electric powertrains, we might have to completely reimagine what we think of when someone says sports car.